Hey everyone, welcome. We're gonna get started in just a minute. Why don't you start dropping your name in the chat, where you're from. We have a few hundred people on the call already, really exciting to see. Great, so welcome to Texas Freeze 101, Why We Need Public Power. My name is Gustavo, I use he, him pronouns, and I'm on the Green New Deal campaign committee of the Democratic Socialists of America. We're DSA. We aren't gonna let the pandemic defeat us. We won't let the climate crisis defeat us. This moment calls for collective action, and it's an opportunity to politicize ourselves and our neighbors, and that's why we wanted to pull this call together. All the time, we know that the climate crisis increasingly is going to present us with essentially moments of social collapse. And we need to use these moments to build working class power. That's why we're here today. And I'm going to start introducing our panelists. We have five comrades today, some from Texas, some from New York. Why don't we go first from Didi? Let's hear your name, where you're from, pronouns, and how you got started fighting in the energy system. Oh, Didi, you're muted.
Sorry, I apologize for that. Didi Blamaris, I'm from San Antonio, Texas. My pronouns are her, she, ella. And like I said, I'm from San Antonio. I'm a climate justice organizer with Public Citizen. And I do all work around our utility, CPS Energy, regarding coal plants and climate planning. And thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Let's go to Alex.
Hey folks, this is Alex Burnell, pronouns he, him, based out of San Antonio with San Antonio DSA. Like Didi, I work with her on the Recall CPS Energy campaign to produce energy democracy with our municipal utility here and shut down a coal plant in the south side of San Antonio, the J.K. Spruce coal plant. Happy to be here.
And how about Kate?
Hey everyone, thanks so much for inviting me to be on, especially as a non-Texan. I am calling in from Brooklyn, originally from New Jersey. Pronouns are she, her, and I am a staff writer for the New Republic, where I mostly cover climate and energy issues, and especially this week, Texas.
Great to have you. Let's go to Amanda.
Howdy, y'all. I'm Amanda Cavazos-Weems. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a labor organizer with the Texas State Employees Union. We've opposed the privatization of public resources as kind of the cornerstone of our union since we were founded in the 80s. Happy to be here.
Welcome. And Brianna?
Hey everyone, my name is Brianna. I also go by B. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also based in San Antonio. I am currently a labor organizer for an education union here in San Antonio. And before that, I was a climate justice organizer, and I did a lot of work around the climate plan in San Antonio and energy issues concerning CPS Energy. Also happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Noah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Noah Hardaway. I think Amanda is presenting the section we had talked about, but I'm with Houston DSA. My pronouns are he, him. I was involved in co-leading the Houston DSA D12 effort back in December, where we had an action in front of oil companies and published an op-ed in Texas Signal and some other actions. Thank you.
Okay, so we know this week people have been dying as a result of the negligence of our political system. Meanwhile, fossil fuel executives are having calls with shareholders where they're salivating over how much they're going to profit from this crisis, and disaster capitalism is taking root. These are all the ways that the ruling class wages war on working people in this country. And so I hope you came here today because you're angry. I've been thinking a lot about how Joe Biden started his campaign at a fundraiser in New York on the Upper East Side, where he told donors that nothing would fundamentally change if he won. And right now, people are dying, and Joe Biden is living up to his word. There's no national leadership in this moment. No one's gonna save us. We have to do it ourselves. And we're gonna hear a little bit about how some of our comrades in Texas are taking on this work right now. What do we think about the political moment? What caused this crisis to begin with? So I'm gonna go over the agenda a little bit, and then I'll pass it off to our speakers. So first we'll hear from Didi about what went wrong in Texas. Then Alex is going to talk about who's been impacted this week. Kate Aronoff will go over how capitalism is the root cause of the crisis. Amanda will talk about our vision for the future. And then Brianna is going to go over some calls to actions, how we can help. And after that, after the presentation is over, we're gonna have some Q&A, probably for about like 15 minutes. We should be done by about 15 past the hour, although we could get through it quicker potentially. So I'm just gonna pass it on to Didi. Thank you again, all the panelists for all your work.
Thank you. Are you going to move to the next? Okay, thank you. So I will be talking about what went wrong here in Texas, and there is a lot wrong with Texas, not just within our grid, but it's deregulation in general, or our lack of regulating businesses in general. But what happened here starting last Sunday was, we got hit by a massive storm that affected all the counties here in Texas. And because of that, our grid operator, which is called ERCOT, and it stands for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. It's kind of ironic that the word reliability is included in its name. And ERCOT operates our electric grid, and it manages the deregulated market for about 75% of Texas. So when we were facing the freeze, the ERCOT was experiencing widespread failure of generation, and wasn't able to provide power to millions of Texas all across the country. So at the peak of so they had to cause blackouts, and at the peak, over 4 million Texans lost power. As of today, 85,000 people here are still without electricity. This caused pipes to freeze and to burst. And I think right now that is probably the most concerning thing for me and our area, is that there are so many people that are without water and are going to lack the funding to replace or fix the pipes that are broken. Right now, 15 million people don't have access to drinkable water, and we don't see any light at the end of the tunnel right now. And because of not having access to drinkable water, we're having to boil it, and that is problematic for so many people who still don't have electricity. Also, grocery stores have run out of food. They're still struggling to keep up with demand. A lot of food went spoiled, and the grocery stores and other retailers are struggling to get shelves stocked again. Next slide. So the heart of what's going wrong here in Texas is the fossil fuel industry. Because the energy infrastructure wasn't adequately winterized, gas, coal, and nuclear power plants froze. So that dramatically reduced capacity. Back in 2011, that was our last major storm. Here in Texas now, granted, we do go through massive heat waves every single summer, but 2011 was our last storm. And at that time, the federal government told ERCOT that utility providers needed to weatherize their power assets. And obviously, the utilities did not do that. So this is why we're here. Wind turbines also froze. But that only makes up about 10% of the utility generation. And it is possible to winterize those turbines, but for-profit energy companies, even our municipal utilities that are very profit-driven, had no incentive to do so. Next slide. I'm sure many of y'all know our Texas Governor, Greg Abbott, and his fellow Republicans wasted no time, and I mean no time, like as soon as this storm hit, we're blaming frozen wind turbines and solar panels to create fear that a Green New Deal would have made it worse here in Texas. And we know that that wasn't true. We know that solar panels and the wind turbines were still reliable, even though they're a smaller generation, a part of our generation. Next slide, please. So as capacity dropped, demand for energy surged, and in response, ERCOT implemented these blackouts. And in some counties, over 90% of households lost power. And with these blackouts, many of us are asking, I know here locally and throughout the state, is how did ERCOT implement these blackouts? What they do is they tell utilities, you need to shed some of the load, take some of that power off the grid so that we can conserve it. But how utilities went around to different cities and different neighborhoods, cutting off people's electricity, which should have been, if it was a rollout, it should have happened, 10, 15 minutes at a time. Sadly, some families, thousands, hundreds, millions of families went without electricity for 48, 80 hours. Next slide. So why are we here? What is the motive? And the motive especially here in Texas, with our very conservative leadership, is to keep the profits going while we're freezing, and even as we try to recover from the electricity loss. Wholesale natural gas prices have spiked. Up to 100 times the usual amount. I live in San Antonio, Texas. Our provider is CPS Energy. It is the largest municipal utility in the country. And we also are the largest provider to the grid. So making money at the end of the day is what they're in the business of doing. And it's going to cause a lot of problems in terms of bills for customers in the very near future. So private energy markets promise obscene profits for producers and re-election for the politicians who enable them. And that matters more to them than the light and heat for ordinary Americans, and not just also the fact that what the companies that are putting money in their pockets are also the types of fuel sources that are driving climate change. And that is affecting all of us, and especially here in Texas with our extreme weather events, whether it's this freeze or it's heat waves, it's hurricanes. And I know that especially our camaradas in the coastal area have felt the impacts of hurricanes. Next month, I don't think it's even going to be as short of as long as next month. I think that they're looking at raising gas costs onto taxpayers immediately. And I know I'm speaking only for our utility, but they're already talking about, there is this possibility that we're going to have to, this is going to impact bills, but we'll try and make it easier on everybody by spreading out those costs over, let's say, 20 years. And really, the people that have suffered, the millions of people that have suffered because of our deregulated grid should not have to pay for their mistakes. So this is our free market. And we know that the market rewards a lot of people and penalizes the people that are suffering right now. Next slide. And I'm going to now pass it on to Alex Burnell, who will be talking about who has been impacted the most. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for that overview, Dee Dee. It's good to be with you and to be with everybody. It's been an incredibly cold week, but I feel the warmth of comradeship, the warmth of possibility, the warmth provided by anger, as Chris was saying in the chat earlier. And there's a lot of reason to be angry in terms of the human fallout of this crisis, this entirely preventable crisis. I'm going to do my best to be as comprehensive as possible about some of the human fallout of class warfare, which is, what this is. It's climate catastrophe that's been born by the motivation to make profit instead of safeguard our Earth's planetary systems. And that has been really reaped on Texans this past week. So to start, just some facts about the devastation. To begin, we've got 450 carbon monoxide related calls in the state that have taken place over the state. That's folks that are, experiencing carbon monoxide from using outdoor electricity generation to get heat on the inside, and experiencing carbon monoxide poisoning as a result of that. And so you've got 450 cases of that across the state that people are experiencing. In terms of water, right? 1,180 public water systems in 160 counties reported disruptions from the water storms. And this has affected 15 million people as of Friday morning. This could be either not having water at all, being affected by a water boil notice as a result of low pressure in the water system, or having burst pipes that both ruin your water to shower, to drink, to cook, but also ruin potentially your living space, as the destruction from burst pipes creates all kinds of unforeseen damage in people's homes. So you've got a lot of effects to the water system, and this is information coming from the Texas Commission on the Environmental Quality. As we know, Texans of color are disproportionately devastated by death and unemployment in the last year, especially during COVID. They tend to live in neighborhoods with older homes, more vulnerable pipes, and fewer food options. That's made this situation, the situation caused by, the climate crisis, the polar vortex that capitalism drives, a lot harder to withstand for those folks during cold temperatures and power outages. In terms of the scale and scope of Texans that have been affected by that, 4 million Texans this last week went without power in temperatures that in some places reached a wind chill of negative. And so really, really unprecedented weather in terms of what Texas is ready for in terms of our infrastructure and in terms of what our most vulnerable are ready to endure in terms of their access to resources. Again, 15 million folks with impacted water systems from those 160 counties that reported disruptions. You've got several cities in Texas that have the highest concentrations of poverty in the country, at least 4 or 5. As a state, we've got the third most COVID deaths at just over, again, pandemic-related economic stresses are just compounding the stresses caused by this event for those most vulnerable and poor folks. A disaster really within a disaster. And then you've got a situation where if you're incarcerated, the Texas Jail Project, if you want to follow this real-time kind of update that's being done, they're tracking the situation. Again, the Texas Jail Project, inside prisons, people without power and without water, reports of overflowing toilets with feces and human waste, freezing jail cells. So the situation inside our Texas jails is also incredibly dire. ICE agents turning on fans and throwing away blankets in our ICE facilities in terms of how people react to the weather, complaining about these conditions as anyone would. ICE agents doing this in retaliation. And then we've got impacts to our homeless population and to our disabled. There's a story here in San Antonio, Ralph Garcia, somebody who has muscular dystrophy, some reporting that's been done in Deceleration News, a local reporter here, on what the lack of power has meant for folks with disabilities. You had in Crosby, Texas, a veteran who died in a vehicle seeking emergency oxygen in his truck after power cut off. And so just the human fallout has been really, really immense. And all the while there's examples of class war and class difference. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide where I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Actually, I think it makes sense to have the other slide up for this. My bad. All the while, you've got Ted Cruz flying to Cancun, as there's been much news made of. Really a different world for our who's behind an anti-homelessness campaign called Save Austin Now, chartering a flight to Miami along with him and his friends. You've got the CEO of Comstock Resources, Jerry Jones, quoted as saying, "This week is hitting like the jackpot with some of these incredible prices. We were able to sell at super premium prices for a material amount of production." You've got lit up downtown skylines and high rises. You've got politicians like Greg Abbott, who has fundraised more than any other governor in US history, 26 million of those fundraised dollars coming from the oil and gas industry. So you've really got a situation where ordinary Texans are left out to dry, and our politicians and our Republican leadership and those who are well off are treating this as a vacation opportunity, are using their own private planes to escape, while those in jails, those without homes, and those of us without power are poisoned, are dealing with, boil water notices, no heat, no electricity. So really the division is very, very stark. Millions of Texans impacted in that way. And again, Greg Abbott going to disparage the Green New Deal and instead of moving to end the crisis. Governor Rick Perry to avoid federal regulation. And this is all really, really shocking and disheartening and angersome to those that are listening in Texas. Many folks on this call experienced this past week. It poisons us, but it does empower us. We just before this event took place, this winter storm, we added 2 more cancer clusters in Houston's 5th Ward and in the Kashmir Gardens for children's leukemia. Burning coal at CPS Energy in the JK Spruce plant has contributed to some of the highest asthma rates in the nation in this city. So we've really got an example of a contrast that as socialists really, really matters for us. And that is one of disaster capitalism versus disaster collectivism. And so we're going to do a little bit of talking about mutual aid later on in the call, but that's just kind of an overview of what it's been like for folks in Texas here. And so I'll go ahead and pass it on.
Everyone, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm just very, very honored to be included in this great event. So obviously the subject heading of how did capitalism lead to this is one that you could sort of date back to the enclosure of farmland in England, but I'm not gonna go back that far. And we'll talk specifically about utilities and how that got this bad. And the thing I think that's just really important to really nail home about this is that the concept of making a profit off of what should be essential services like electricity, like water, is historically novel and historically unpopular with large segments of the population globally and also, specifically in the United States. So I'm going to try to give a little bit of this historical overview for that and kind of how that landed us here. And my preface to that is that I struggle to write about this subject in increments of like less than 3,000 words. So we'll do my best to condense that all into 10 minutes. So for about as long as there's been electricity in the United States, there's been public power, right? And so right as sort of lines are being erected, it doesn't take people very long to figure out that this service is better off in the hands of the people who are getting it in sort of municipalities and states than it is in the hands of profit makers. And so very, very early on, investor-owned utilities know they're unpopular, and so strike this bargain with state governments to be regulated by public service commissions. And so that is done as a way to secure their monopolies over their service areas. And so very early on, what they realize is that because they have to go to public service commissions to raise their rates and to fund new infrastructure, they can just bake regulatory capture right into their business model, right? And so public service commissions are generally appointed by governors or by state legislatures, or they're elected. And so in either of those cases, utilities which can legally make a profit can pour those profits into these elections, particularly, as campaign finance laws have gotten worse over the last several decades. And so that early on is just the model. That is the way that investor-owned utilities work, is to buy off the people who are tasked with reining them in. But even through that, even after they strike this bargain, they still have to fight off publicly owned utilities around the clock. And so they invest in doing things like buying off academic departments. They go to colleges, even go to elementary schools, and they write curriculum and they pay off professors to spread the word about how good private energy is, right? And so they rebrand themselves in some cases as public utilities to sort of confuse people about what they're doing, which is, again, making a profit off an essential service. And they don't extend their lines, right? Until the 1930s, until the New Deal, which I'll talk about in a minute, about 90% of cities are electrified, but 90% of rural homes are not, right? And so they are not extending what, again, should be something which is needed for survival. It sort of very quickly becomes a sort of essential fact of life. They are just not meeting a need because it's not profitable to do so. And so these companies continue to grow through these things called holding companies, which sort of buy up shares in different utilities around the country. And by the 1920s, just 3 companies own about half of the electricity industry in the United States. So there's a lot of pushback on this, and there's sort of political meddling all over the map. And in the early days of the Great Depression, one of these holding companies' empires collapses and is blamed for making the Great Depression as bad as it is, a holding company empire owned by this man named Samuel Insull. And so the government cracks down, right? You have the emergence of the New Deal order, which passes a law called PUCA, which I won't explain here for the sake of trying to keep things somewhat short. And that really limits what these holding companies can do and limits what for-profit electric utilities can do, and is immediately just fought with the full weight of investor-owned utilities lobbying muscle, including the thing that still exists today called the Edison Electric Institute, which fights back the New Deal at every turn. And as part of the New Deal, electrification is extended. Public power is extended through programs like the Rural Electrification Administration, through the TVA, and that essential service can fill in the gaps left by the private sector. And so that is largely, a successful project for the first couple of years. And what you see through the course of the 20th century is an attempt to beat back public power again and again and again, defunding the REA, defunding the TVA. Almost every president sort of attempts to do that in various forms. And so what happens toward the end of the century is you see the emergence of a neoliberal governance model in electricity. And so if, we can think of capitalism as something which wants to create a commodity out of everything, which wants to turn a profit off of anything it can, neoliberalism sort of designs the state to make that possible. And so that, is pushed in electricity aggressively by a company which we tend to think of as being this sort of aberrant bad actor, called Enron, which is based in Houston, has very deep roots in Texas, and has a close friendship with the Bush administration, the first Bush administration, with Governor Bush in Texas, and develops a close relationship with Bill Clinton. And so what Enron, I won't go too deep into this, but Enron depends on deregulation of the sector in order to make a profit, right? So they need prices to be volatile. They need more things to be moving around and more things for energy to be not either a service or sort of a hard thing that is like a real brick and mortar commodity, but numbers on a spreadsheet, right? And so what they push for with state level lobbying efforts through friendships at the White House is for deregulation. And so whereas before, you would have vertically integrated utilities regulated by public service commissions that generated power, that distributed power, and which run transmission lines. Deregulation breaks that process up, and it opens different segments of those businesses up to different actors, right? And so I don't want to say that what was in place before of investor-owned utilities was good, right? But this neoliberal governance model sort of transforms that and makes electricity something where there are just many more actors in place. And so this is where you get things like ERCOT. And that becomes the first ISO, which sort of manages different sources of generation, which are, again, being broken up from just being centralized in one utility. And now generation can sort of come from different plants that are owned by different companies all over a state. Or in the case of other ISOs and RTOs, can come also from different parts of a region. And they all feed into these ISOs and RTOs, regional transmission organizations, which sort of manage how electrons get to different places. And that is ostensibly ERCOT's job, right, is to do that. And so in Enron's case, right, that creates this huge volatility in the price of power. They can withhold power selectively, and then unleash it and create these sort of strategic deficiencies, which just drive up their profits because the price is so volatile. And so you have that kind of market logic injected into every piece of the electricity sector. So that happens through the mid-90s or through the late 90s. Different states deregulate their sectors. That process happens most aggressively in Texas, right? And so in part because that is the home of Enron, they are there's all these letters from Ken Lay to George W. Bush, asking him to deregulate the state sector, and creates stuff like what we're seeing now with the system known as retail choice, right? Which is this incredibly predatory system where basically people choose between different electricity providers. So not the people who kind of run the grid, but the people who sell you the power, basically, who don't own any lines, but basically go around and sort of pitch different pricing schemes. And so the people who buy wholesale power with companies like Griddy are just totally exposed to this incredibly volatile market that ERCOT controls. And so this is why you have people paying sort of $10,000 bills, even if their power went out in some cases, just because you have the ability for all of these sort of middlemen, all these like vultures essentially to come in and just make a profit off of this thing, which should not be subject to a profit motive, right? And so my time is a little bit wrapping up, but I think that the point I'd like to end on is that I think this moment, as sort of tragic as it is, really creates an opportunity to point out how weird and bad the system is, how weird and bad it is to have an energy system that is run for profit. So I will end there. I'm excited for the rest of the discussion.
All right, y'all, I think I'm taking over next. If we could get to the next slide. Kate and everyone did a great job of summarizing where we are and how we got here. And I'm here to kind of do the tone shift of our vision for the future and what we can win together. There are almost 500 people on this call, and I'm really excited to see the collective action that we're going to move towards from this point. And part of how we do that is by discussing our shared vision for the future. So what is the alternative to a failed for-profit, mostly private power grid that leaves millions to freeze? What do we do to push back against this Texas model that we're seeing come to states all over the country? We can fight together for a federally owned supergrid that allows energy to be imported from regions of the country that have an excess of solar, wind, or other energy. We can make sure that the utilities are publicly owned and democratically controlled and accountable to the people that they serve. We can make sure that our utilities invest in resilience through maintenance, upgrades, microgrids, battery storage, doing things that care for each other and maintain a place where we can all live together with things like tree trimming, redundancy equipment, and making sure that there are enough public workers to make sure all of these tasks get done. Next slide. So we also want an end to utility shutoffs for non-payment because heat and light are human rights. We can't survive without them. Part of this, our vision is to push for an end to environmental racism and racist power cutoffs that are designed to preserve power in wealthier, wider areas. I know we all kind of saw the photos that were coming out as this was happening about certain parts of cities had lights and certain parts didn't. And I know in Austin, there's a long history of environmental racism that follows the racist divides in our suburbs. We need programs to prioritize power restoration to the most vulnerable. We need 100% clean, renewable, affordable energy, solar, wind, and wave for everyone, and making sure that it's publicly owned and built and maintained with good union jobs. Next slide. The good news is we already have comrades all over the country engaged in this work. There are public power campaigns happening in New York, Boston, Chicago, San Antonio, DC, East Bay, San Francisco, and San Diego. So we don't have to rebuild it. The work is already being done. So we can share notes with each other and best practices and cheat off each other's homework a little bit to make sure everyone gets what they need. And with even more action items on how we bring about this better future and bring about our shared vision. So I'm gonna keep it brief and pass it over to Brianna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. So I have the privilege of kind of asking the $1 million question of, you know, what are we to do in this moment? So if we could go to the next slide, please. Yes, so one of the big things I want to mention to begin is mutual aid. I keep hearing about people's anger and rage, and that is, I am also angry and full of rage. And I think for everyone that comes from such a deep place of love and care for each other and for this planet that we call home. And the state on every single fucking level has failed us. And so it has become our job to care for each other. And we have seen over and over again with each new crisis, mutual aid efforts popping up like a million roses in spring across the state of Texas. And a Texas organization called Move Texas, they did the immense work of putting together a mutual aid directory for Texas. And so I'm pointing to everyone this link tree, and I'm sure someone will put the link in the chat so you can get to it easily. But basically, if you're outside of Texas and you're looking for ways to donate, use that directory. It's a very comprehensive resource for the work that's happening on the ground, whether it's water distribution, getting food to folks who need it, getting people to safe shelter, to warm shelter, helping people with repairs and stuff like that. And we're seeing this immense work being done by community members, by DSA members, by people who, like you and I, are full of rage and love. And so in addition to on that link tree are resources for some different counties, counties with like the big cities in them. So if you are someone in Texas and in one of those counties, this is a really useful resource if you're trying to figure out where can I get water, or where is there a warming center, or whatever. Check out those links as well. And for Bexar County specifically, I know that it's also in Spanish. So, you know, language justice right there. And I will also say, if you are someone doing mutual aid work in Texas, the bottom link of that link tree is a form to submit your work if you don't see it already in the directory. So again, let's keep adding to that resource, that archive. Again, people who are outside of the state looking for ways to help, and you have the means, or if you're even in the state and you have the means, please donate to the people who are doing this vital work on the ground level. You know, DSA is not the state, and neither, you know, these small funds, small orgs on the ground level doing this work too are also not the state, but we are essentially being forced to take on the role of the state to prevent even more widespread misery and death, all in the name of love for one another. Can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so it's in addition to doing mutual aid, to participating in mutual aid or donating to mutual aid, it's really important that people are also getting involved in like these transformative reform efforts to change the conditions that have led to the current crisis, right? And to change the current conditions that will lead to future crises. And one of those ways is the PRO Act. So we can only win transformative reforms like the Green New Deal with a radicalized and organized working class. And that means we need a much stronger labor movement. That's why DSA is launching a push for the first 100 days of the new administration to pass the PRO Act, which is the Protect the Right to Organize Act. This would strengthen unions and the power of the working class to organize on the job, helping to build labor power as strong as it needs to be in the months and then years ahead to win a just transition to a green economy for all workers, right? The original New Deal was won through militant labor organizing, and rebuilding this capacity is crucial to the theory of the theory of power our campaign has developed for a radical Green New Deal. The main point basically is that we need to reverse the right to work laws that prevent workers from unionizing. This is critical to expanding workers' power to organize on the job, which we need across all sectors of the economy, but especially for sectors that are vital to organize towards a Green New Deal, like renewable energy and other critical infrastructure. So the PRO Act is an incredibly important step towards that, and DSA is throwing down with labor unions to organize the power we need to win it this year. So I believe one of the co-hosts is going to pull up the form right now to kind of walk people through filling it out, since we want folks to be able to do that right now. And then, we wanted to get people involved in this because we need strong unions, basically. So I'm sure the link has been posted in the chat. Click on it, fill out the form, and soon, not today necessarily, but soon you will be receiving more details on how to get involved. So are we pulling up the form, or should we? I did see a quick shout out. I do want to shout out all the union folks here, especially people who work in critical infrastructure who have been literally keeping us alive. And we need more folks in those fields, and we need more unions doing that work. Yeah, shout out, if any of you are here from unions, shout out your union in the chat. We want to see all those amazing. Okay, so here's the form. And you can see Joe Schmo is super pro-union and absolutely wants to get involved in how to make the PRO Act a reality. So we put in your zip code, put in your state, your address, how long you've been a DSA member, or if you are a DSA member. And then of course, if you're a union member, what union are you in? What local do you belong to? Not yet, but soon. And whether or not you have any organizing experience, have you ever tried to organize your workplace? No experience necessary. These are all skills that we have all learned, and we'll continue to learn, continue to teach people. And then whether or not you work in one of these energy fields, and your racial identity, and then and then if you have any organizing experience, and when you're available for a one-on-one, the good old one-on-one. All right, so again, it takes about 30 seconds to fill out this form, maybe a couple minutes if your internet is slow. And but this is the way, y'all, to get involved, especially if you're in a union or you're interested in labor organizing. We have to become organized, even more organized as a workforce, in order to win the world that we need. All right, can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so other ways to plug in. So there is now a website with all the graphics that you've seen on this really informative panel, powerfortexas.org. So, you know, click that website, go to it, bookmark it, share it with everyone. It has upcoming events. It has, like I said, those graphics. It has fact sheets, and it is also in Spanish. And so, you know, if you are kind of new to these kind of politics, to grid politics, to energy politics, this is a great resource to kind of educate yourself and learn how to talk with the lingo about what exactly is happening in this shitstorm without just using the word shitstorm. So can we go back to the presentation, please? And then, of course, especially if you're out of the state, following Texas DSA chapters on social media, the below Austin, Corpus Christi, El Paso, Fort Worth, Houston, North Texas, RGV, and San Antonio are all the active chapters in the state of Texas. Following them on social media. I know San Antonio's been doing this, but you know, we've been really highlighting mutual aid efforts. We've been highlighting like critical information, ways you can donate, ways to get involved. And so that is always a really important, really valuable thing to do, to stay really kind of in the know of what's happening on the ground level. Next slide, please. And then lastly, some statewide actions targeted for Texans. If you are a Texan and you've been impacted, which you almost certainly have, please share your story on Texas Freeze Story. We, at the very least, will be using these stories to inform narratives, inform social media campaigns, and to inform kind of just how we are framing our work and action around this issue going forward. And then for Texans, so the Texas legislative is in session. It's in session every 2 years. Of course, they're having kind of these emergency hearings on the energy grid, the Texas energy grid system. It's starting as soon as next week. So if you can, click that link, the Texas Energy Hearing link, and go and put in your comment, your public comment. These comments are important because they're compiled into reports. They have the potential to influence policy, and it's important that people who've been impacted share like what has happened to them. It makes a difference going forward if there's like 30 versus 3,000 or even 30,000 comments that are submitted, and we need to make it the state's problem going forward in terms of needing to fix what is happening. Next slide, please. And then, of course, so we are keeping all of the action items that I've just talked about are in this link, powerfortexas.org/take-action. So if you continue about your day and you're like, oh God, what did they talk about? Or I want to share this stuff with someone else, whatever the case may be, this is where we're housing everything. One convenient link. So again, go to that link, bookmark that link, memorize that link, share that link. It'll be an important landing page going forward. So I just want to say that, like what other people have touched on prior, is that what we're seeing, the narratives from conservatives across the state, and even some Democrats, but mostly like, these really right-wing conservatives, we're seeing already a disaster capitalism response, right? And so it's up to us to respond with disaster socialism and the disaster collectivism, because like we know, it's either eco-socialism or it's barbarism. So it's up to us, y'all. Thank you.
Okay, let's give it up for our panelists. That was awesome. We're gonna hear from one more person, a comrade in Houston. Madeline is joining us and is just gonna share her experience this week, what they've been up to in Houston. And then we'll take some questions. So if you have questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A box and we'll pick a few and go over them. Take it away.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Madeline. I am Madeline Pelzel, she, her pronouns, here in Houston. Just in terms a little bit about the experience, I'm going to start from now and actually work my way back instead of starting at the first day of the freeze. I'm here now at a big distribution site. As soon as DSA members here were, back on our feet, we started mobilizing, and we've got our third mutual aid day in a row happening. We're 3 hours in. So we're here at a public housing complex, and we've gotten thousands and thousands of donations and served a couple hundred folks today with basic needs such as food and water, but also menstrual products and baby products, as well as clothing. So we sort of, as the chapter, tried to make sure ourselves were on our feet, and now we've been collaborating with other aid organizations. But earlier this week, we were not all in situations where we could even think about it. Starting Monday morning, we had snow for the first time in a really long time. So people were really excited and out sledding. And by the time everyone got back to their houses, most people had no power, no water. At least that's what happened to my household. In the morning, we made our coffee. We went out to go sled on the pretty flat ground. And then by 10 a.m., no power, no water. Everything had burst and was shut off. And so we spent the next many hours trying to assemble supplies and fill our cars with gas. And we had no power for probably about 24 hours for the first time. Our house got down in the 30-degree ranges. Houses in Texas, especially in Houston, are built for the summer. They're built to let air move through them so that we have, they can cool down in the summer. And so one thing we really need to focus on is updating those building codes so that houses here and all kinds of structures are really built to withstand different types of temperatures. Because one thing that is a huge issue here is really just the way the buildings are built, because they can't hold in the heat. And that's by design, actually. It's not just that they're not, built well. And so our house got down into the 30s for many, many hours. And then we would get power for about 4 hours at a time, usually at night. I think demand was lower from other types of things. And so we would wake up, we had all our lights set on so that whenever the power came on, it would wake us up, and we would start cooking frantically, because although a lot of us have gas stoves, the fan to bring the gas out of your house is electric. So people are like, oh, we have gas, you can still cook. But actually, a lot of people have been being sent to the hospital and even dying because of carbon monoxide and other types of fumes in their houses. So it's just, everything is so all encompassing. Anyhow, so we've managed now to get enough water and resources for our household. And so we've been out here. Anyhow, that's pretty much what's been happening. Now Texas is pretty thawed out, but the situation in Houston is still quite dire. Everything's being rationed at the grocery stores, and the food bank is at capacity. And we're really just trying to go to where people are, because a lot of people don't have gas because a lot of the gas stations are out. The whole city still has a boil order notice, and people still don't have power. I luckily do, however, a lot of folks don't. So we're people are using bottled water for everything, using pool water if they have access to it to flush toilets. We're definitely not out of the weeds, but at least there's a good number of folks, like I said, I'll show one more time, who are, able to come help out. You see all the red shirts? There we are. Anyways, so I'll let y'all get back to it, but thanks for having me on, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Madeline. That was awesome. Can somebody unpin Madeline's video so we can go back to the grid view, I guess. So let's start with a few questions. One person asked about ending utility shutoffs. Are there any examples or frameworks to draw upon for what a plan to end utility shutoffs for non-payment looks like? Does anyone want to answer that? Has anyone here been organizing around utility shutoffs?
I can speak to that for San Antonio. A couple of different coalitions, including Recall CPS Energy, that Alex and I are involved in. We have asked for the utility to extend the moratorium on disconnections, but after that we need to look at the policy of not disconnecting anybody's utility, starting off with people within a certain poverty level, although we do believe that nobody should ever have their utilities cut off. We need water, we need electricity. And I do know that Austin Energy does have a permanent policy on disconnects for people within a certain income range.
I also know that Boston DSA members introduced a piece of legislation this week, maybe, to, I think, cancel utility debt, or maybe in half in that state, something like that, with a DSA state legislator there. So Steve asks, what has been the response of unions in Texas to all of the disaster capitalism and anti-renewable energy and anti-Green New Deal propaganda?
I can take a shot at that one. I know I'm in the middle of trying to stand up. Hey, actually, one of my union members just brought in bottled water, because that's what we're trying to do right now, is set up our union as a distribution point for bottled water for our members and for the community. I've been following the example personally of my union siblings at the United Professional Organizers. They've been out and operating as a warm shelter this whole time, housing our unhoused neighbors and picking people up, dropping people off at hotels. Like, they've been doing amazing work through this. And I hope that unions can be part of the response in a mutual aid way, and also in trying to hold elected leaders accountable and shift the balance of power in the state. I know we definitely have our eye on the public hearing that's coming up on the 25th, motivating our members to submit public comment and let state politicians know that our response as a state has been unacceptable. And further than that, like I said kind of in the intros, our union has opposed privatization. That's been one of our major issues since we were founded in the 80s. This Texas model of underinvestment in public services, deregulation and privatization only serves the wealthy. It does not serve the people of the state. And that's why we as public sector workers fight hard to keep public goods as public goods. So that way we can continue the work of serving our communities. So that's a little bit of what we've been up to.
Awesome. Kate, do you have any readings to recommend?
On privatization and, was that a question?
Yeah, somebody asked. Does Kate have any readings to recommend? I assume like on energy, or like in
yes,
this, you know.
Yeah, there's a book called Power Play that is a little old now. It was published sometime in the 90s by a woman named Sharon Bader. That really goes into the history of privatization. Electricity, it looks at the US, also the UK and Australia. And it's just such a good sort of like basic history for all of that. There's also a book, which I'm forgetting the name of, but my laptop is resting on right now, by a guy named Richard Hirsch called Power Loss. That kind of looks like a textbook. I think it's like easy enough to find used copies of all of these on your retailer of choice. And yeah, I think those would be my go-tos for understanding the utility sector.
Cool. And maybe let's just do one more. Maybe a few of you want to answer this or comment on it. Mike Siegel asked, what should our demands be here in Texas as a progressive / populist / left response to this crisis?
I can respond to that, at least in part. I'm sure there's several things to be said. I think when Amanda was giving the vision of the future, I certainly think that there's policy steps that need to be taken to make that future real. Grid integration and weatherization, both at the utility level, but also from the state legislature is necessary. And then I think also too, the necessity to set precedent by making some heads roll, figuratively. The legacy of this privatization starts with the Bush administration, and that was the same person who was responsible for inaction on Katrina, another climate catastrophe, and the failure to hold anybody from that administration from the time he was governor to the time he was president is goes a long way in letting the Texas energy independence narrative, continue to exist through this legacy of failure. So I think also there's several folks at ERCOT, the governor, Ted Cruz, utility execs locally, all need to take accountability. And I've already seen the exact opposite from all of those folks. So it's going to take organized pressure to turn the direction of that energy around and call for resignations because these people literally have blood on their hands. There's folks that have died as a result of this, and it was entirely preventable and knowable if they took the climate crisis more seriously. So that's what I'd like to say.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on this? What should a left vision for a response in Texas be? Also in the Facebook, there's like a Facebook live stream, there's a question, any action / disruption / talking points for Monday's CPS board meeting?
Yeah, so if you go to the San Antonio DSA Instagram, we recently posted an action regarding CPS energy and kind of like our demands and how you can submit those demands and statements regarding such to CPS. And some of those demands are, waive any bills. We've already seen kind of like the screenshots coming from their Q&As around like, we understand that the bills are going to be super high and we're going to put those on a 10-year payment plan as opposed to doing the right thing, which is to waive those bills, considering many of the people were barely using energy or weren't using much. And then also using this moment to say, we're in the middle of an ecological crisis and we need to stop our dependence on fossil fuels. And one of the first things that should happen is shutting down our damn coal plant. Because again, like what, my comrade Alex was saying earlier about how this coal plant is contributing to asthma rates and other like health issues in the state. And so as these crises become worse, we are looking at of how to reduce emissions right away. And closing a coal plant is one of them. And then, strengthening efficiency programs and conservation efforts, weatherize everything, hashtag weatherize everything. And And also, we've been seeing some things about, well, CPS is a public entity, or, public utility, but we're wanting to make CPS a democratic utility, and that's what it currently isn't. And that's what we need every utility to be, is a democratic utility that serves the people, and not the profits of a few, or the shareholders in industry. CPS and even Austin Energy may be public, but they're part of a larger statewide private for-profit apparatus that we need to completely upend. And so if you're in San Antonio, or you're interested in this kind of work that's happening in San Antonio, definitely follow Recall CPS on Instagram, on Twitter. It is our energy democracy campaign that's happening. So that's what's happening kind of with CPS and in the San Antonio context.
Thank you so much. So I think we're about to close. I will just add that I'm in New York. We have our own struggles for energy democracy. The same problems that are happening in Texas are happening in New York and in every state, and basically everywhere on the planet right now. And I think that this is a moment also to really make demands of the federal government. We are lucky to be in the largest socialist organization that has existed for many decades. There were over 600 people watching this call today from all over the country, and we will not be able to transform our energy system without solidarity from struggle from everyone in the country, so that we can really use the capacity of the federal government to decarbonize and democratize, Austin Energy and CPS, and to create a national connected federally owned grid. So let's get to it. And if you're not a DSA member, join DSA at dsausa.org/join. Thank you, everyone.